Tov. Today's filming is Nazir Taf Tezayin, Nazir 16. We're going to start with the new chapter of Misha Amar. And this chapter is going to really take us back. A lot of this chapter goes, the main part of this chapter was discussed earlier back on Daf Hey Amud Aleph, going through Vav Amud Beis from 5a through 6b. And so therefore, we're going to have to give a little introduction really to understand this chapter. So back on the Daf Hey Amud Aleph, we learned that there were the Mishnah, the four-word Mishnah said that the Stam Nazirus, that a basic Nazirus, if you don't specify, is 30 days. And the Gemara there has a dispute between Rav Masna and Bar Pada. What's the source for this idea? Rav Masna had said that the source was the Gematria, Kadoshi Yeh. The word Yeh, the Gematria, is 30. And so therefore, he says Stam Nazirus is 30 days. Whereas Bar Pada said it's based upon the fact that the word Nazir appears 29 times in the Torah. And so therefore, the Nazir is Stam Nazirus is 29 days and not 30 days. And in that context, this is, and so therefore, according to Rav Masna and according to Bar Pada, that biblically speaking, you could bring your carbon on day 30, because according to Rav Masna, because we would say Mikza Sayom Kakula, once we reach day 30, you could bring your carbon. According to Bar Pada, because it's the day after the 29th day, so even though he doesn't say Mikza Sayom Kakula, you still bring your carbon on day 30. However, that's only biblically speaking. But the Chachamim said that you're only supposed to cut your hair on day 31. That's when you bring your carbon and cut your hair. So what's the reason according to Rav Masna? Because he says, even though ideally we said we do say Mikza Sayom Kikul, and nevertheless the Chachamim say you should complete the 30 days. And so therefore Masna says lechatchila cut your hair on day 31. And Bar Pada, the reason we don't cut our hair on day 30 is because maybe you're going to say Hareini Nazir Shloshim Yom, that I'm a Nazir for 30 complete days. And then you wouldn't be able to cut it on day 30 in the morning. You'd have to cut it in on day 31. And so therefore they made a gzera that you should cut your hair on day 31. And Rav Masna Bar Pada also had a machlokas about somebody who became tamei on the day he was supposed to bring his karbanos, i.e., let's say he became tamei on day 30 before he brought his karbanos. So according to Rav Masna, we're going to say you need to go back and redo the Nazirus biblically speaking and bring the carbon Nazir that a tamei Nazir brings. Because as long as he has not brought his karbanos, he's still in his Nazirus, and it doesn't help him in that context, the Mikza Sayom Kikul. But according to Bar Pada, if you became tamei on day 30, the first Nazirus is not nisteres. It's not going to be it's not going to be messed up, and so therefore he doesn't bring the carbon Nazir tamei. So all of this was the dispute we had back on Daf Hey Amud Aleph through Vav Amud Beis, and the Gemara there, in order to cite proofs for this discussion, had cited our Mishnah here, and so therefore most of the commentary takes place earlier. So the first Amud of our Gemara is really something, it's a review of the context of what we had earlier. So says our Mishnah, Misha Amar Hareini Nazir, if a person says, I'm a Nazir, Megalech Yom Shloshim Ve'echad, he's ideally going to cut his hair on day 31. According to Rav Masna, because l'chadchila we don't say Mikza Sayom Kikul on day 30. And according to Bar Pada, it's a gezerah, maybe he's going to have said, Hareini Nazir Shloshim Yom. Vim Gilech Yom Shloshim, but well, according to Rav Masna and Bar Pada, if he cut his hair on day 30, he ought to fulfill his obligation. Because according to Rav Masna, we say Mikza Sayom Kikul, and according to Bar Pada, we say Midiraisa, so you only have to do it 29 days. Let's say a person says Hareini Nazir Shloshim Yom, a person says I'm a Nazir for full 30 days, then Im Gilech Yom Shloshim Yotza, then if he cut his hair on day 30, he hasn't fulfilled his obligation. Why hasn't he fulfilled his obligation? Because he has to do the full 30 days if you use that language. But let's say Misha Nazir Shtei Naziros. Let's say somebody says I'm a Nazirite for 2 Naziros, means to say I'm a Nazirite for one period and then a second period. Megalech es harishona yom shloshim ve'echad ve'es hashniya yom shishim ve'echad. Then in that context, he cuts his hair for the first one on day 31, like we said, day 31. And the second one, he cuts his hair on day 61 because he waits, mixes Yom Kikuo after day 31. He can start counting the Nazirs for the second period. It doesn't even have to be mixed Yom Kikuo. It's day 31, counts already the start of the second Naziris. But let's say he did. He cut his hair on the 30th day. He didn't mix the Yom Kikuo according to Rav Masna or Bar Pada. He just didn't obey the Gzeir of the Rabbanan. Then he still has to cut his hair ideally on the day 31 of the next time, which is day 60. But let's say cut on day 59. Yatzai fulfilled his obligation. And this was, in fact, the Mishnah in Edios tells us that this is what Rabbi Pius testified in front. Rabbi Pius testified where the Mishnah Edios talks about all the testimony that was given about halachos, and he testified about Misha Nazar Shtei Naziros, that a person made a vow to do two Naziroshim Gilech as Harishona Yom Shloshim, that if he cut his hair for the first one on day 30, Megalech as Hashniya Yom Shishim. He cuts his hair for the second one on day 60, which is 31 days later. If he cut his hair for the second one on day 59, Yatsa. Because B'di'evet, day 30 counts as sufficient for him to cut his hair, bring his karbanos. But now says the Mishnah, Misha Amar Hareini Nazir, somebody who says, I'm a Nazir, Nitma Yom Shloshim. Let's say a person says, now we're going to go into a different machlokas. Let's say a person says, Hareini Nazir, and then he doesn't say exactly how many days. So we said, according to Rav Masna, biblically speaking, it's 30. According to Bar Pada, it's 29 days. And then let's say Nitma Yom Shloshim. Now he became Tameh on day 30 before he brought his karbanos. So Sakol. So he knocks out all the days that he's counted until now. And so therefore, after he becomes tar from his tumah, after he brings his karban tumah, after he brings those sacrifices, he has to go and count over his naziris again another 30 days. He has to start over. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer says, Eino soser el shiva. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, he only loses, he only needs to go back and count 7 days to become tahar, and sprinkles the ashes of the red heifer on him, the mechatas, on day 3 and day 7. And so then afterwards he can bring his karbanos, for his karbanos, regular karbanos from Nazir in a state of tahara, but he hasn't lost his initial count. So that the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer is that. So the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer in this context is that even though he hasn't brought his karbanos, we say mikta sayom kikuo. So once he reaches that day 30, it says that we completed his naziros. And so therefore, it's like he became tummy on day 31, and there, under that circumstance, he has not messed up his naziros. So let's say a person says, Hareini Nazir, Shloshim Yom. No, let's say a person says, Hareini Nazir Shloshim Yom, Nitma Yom Shloshim, Soser Sakol. So let's say a person says that we go back to the person at the beginning of our Mishnah who said, Hareini Nazir Shloshim Yom. He says, I'm going to be Nazir for 30 complete days. And so therefore, if he became Tamei Yom Shloshim, Soser Sakol, because he messes up everything because he becomes a Nazir before he completed his complete Naziris, before he completed it. Because there wasn't a Stam Nazir, he said, I'm going to do a full 30 days. But let's say now we have another Machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan. Let's say a person says, Hareini Nazir Mea Yom. Let's say a person says, I'm a Nazirite for 100 days. Then, Nitma Yom Mea Soser Sakol. Then, once he becomes Tamei on day 100, he messes up everything. And Rabbi Eliezer Omer Eno Soser Ela Shloshim. So here Rabbi Eliezer says that, so in this case where the person says I'm a Nazir for 100 days, and so therefore he has to bring his karbanos and shave his hair on day 101, let's say become Tamei on day 100. So since he has not completed his Naziros, he has to be Soser Sakol. Rabbi Eliezer wouldn't argue with the fact that he messed up and he's Soser, but he says that he doesn't have to repeat everything. Rabbi Eliezer's point is, Eino Soser Ela Shloshim, that you only have to complete 30 days, because Rabbi Eliezer's position is that if you're nitma, if you became tamei on the day you complete your nazirus, you don't go back, you only go back and do 30 days. You don't have to do the full nazirus that you messed up, because it says b'yom malos yemei nazir. It says that and the Chachamim darsha from that verse that if you became tamei on the day b'yom malos, that you give him Torah's nazir, which is just 30 days. That's what we said earlier back on Daf Vav Amud Aleph. Let's say now we have a third machokas. First machokas was if you became tamei on day 30. Rabbi Eliezer says only 7 days, and the Chachamim said 30 days. Second machokas, if you became tamei on day 100, the Chachamim say you lose all 100 days, and Rabbi Eliezer says you only lose 30 days. Now there's a third machokas between Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer, and the third machokas Rabbi Eliezer is lenient is as follows. Let's say nitma yom mea ve'echad. Let's say in that case you became tamei on day 101. Then the Chacham say soser shloshim yom. Then the Chacham say you mess up 30 days, because that's the day that you bring your karbanos. That's similar to the day of day 30 of the Nazirus, which is the day that you bring the karbanos midiraisa. The Chacham said that you mess up 30 days. You made a gzera so that you don't come to say, just like if you mess up on day 101, you wait 7 days. So too, if you become tamei on day 30, you wait 7 days. So therefore, the Chachamim made a gezerah. That's how Tosfos understands it. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer Omar Eno Soser Al Shiva. Rabbi Eliezer says in this case you also wait 7 days, because the Chachamim didn't make a gezerah in this case. So the Gemara is going to just basically explain this in this context. Misha Amar Areini Nazir B'nitma Yom Shloshim. So as to call the Chum say if you became tamei on day 30, you mess up everything. As Rabbi Eliezer says, Eino Soser Al Shiva. Rabbi Eliezer says you only mess up 7 days. Because Rabbi Eliezer is at the position on the top of 16b, Kol Achar Melos Shiva Soser. Anytime you've completed your after you've completed your days of your Nazirus, you just have to wait 7 days until you become tar, and then you bring your bonus in your state of taharasa. Because since he said you've done mitzvah and kukuo on day 31, it's as though you completed your Nazirus, and therefore it's as though you became tamei on day 31, where Rabbi Eliezer says you only wait a week to become pure, so you can bring your karbanos in a state of tahara. What Paul Rabbi Eliezer? Well, let's say a person says already Nazir shloshim yom. The person says, I'm going to be complete Nazir for 30 complete days, and then it becomes tamei on 30 days, so sakol. Then everybody would say he messes up there and he has to repeat the 30 days. Well, Paul, Rabbi Eliezer, the Amar Shlomin, because Rabbi Eliezer doesn't argue in a case where he says, I'm Nazir for complete 30 days, because then obviously he can't say Mitzvah Sayam Pekul, so he hasn't completed his Nazirus. But let's say a person says, Areni Nazir Me'ayom, Minitma Yom Me'ay, because a person says, I'm a Nazir for 100 days and come time on day 100, then so Sarai Sakol. Then he needs to go back and count everything. Rabbi Eliezer says, Ena Soser Ela Shloshim. Rabbi Eliezer says, in that case, he still, even though he became tamei, so you might think it's like when he said, Areni Nazir Shloshim Yom, where he has to repeat everything. Rabbi Eliezer has the chiddush that or the leniency that the most you can be soser once you reach the day of your malos is 30 days. Ena Soser Ela Shloshim, the kula, and then the Gemara ends off by saying all of the rest of the Mishnah is kedavina and ba'aliba the barpada the Rav Masna. We have to explain it like we've been doing from the whole time, according to Rav Pada and Barpada and Rav Masna, as we said at the beginning, the basis of the dispute between Barpada and Rav Masna. And then we come on to the next Mishnah, a very powerful Mishnah spiritually. A lot of the classic Rosh Yeshiva gave beautiful, brilliant shiurim on this Mishnah. And this Mishnah tells us, Misha Nazir v'hu b'beis hakvaros. Somebody wants to become a Nazir, but they're standing in a cemetery at the time. They're standing in a cemetery and they take a vow of Nazirus. How could that be? How could you? It's such an obvious contradiction. You're saying, I want to be a Nazir while you're standing in a cemetery. But isn't this all of our lives, that religiously we're standing in one place, we're committing a sin, and then we want to be in another place, and we want to do better, we want to try to be better. But the first thing the Mishnah says is that your Nazirus is not active. While you're in the cemetery, the action is not going to be effective. You have to leave the cemetery in order to grow spiritually. You can't continue. The first step growing spiritually is to stopping the impediment that's stopping you from doing there. You can't say, I'm going to be better while you still have the impediment in front of you. So Misha Nazir basic for someone who takes a vow of Naziris while he's in the cemetery. Says the Mishnah, language is unclear why he uses this. Why does it say specifically 30 days? But even if you're there 30 days, it's a strange point. Why do you mean? Why do you care? Even if they're 200 days, it doesn't count for the count while you're still in the cemetery. Maybe carbon tama, and you don't bring the carbon tama when you eventually become purified from that because it didn't take effect because you were in the cemetery the whole time. Let's say you go out from the Mishnah, from the cemetery, you become purified. Then it does count. Maybe carbon tuma, and then under those circumstances, you would bring the carbon tuma. Well, the Gemara is going to have to explain this because you go out, you become tar, then you go back in, you bring the carbon tuma. Well, what's the chiddush there? That's so obvious. There's nothing new there. So Tosfos on the next stop is going to discuss that. Rabbi Eliezer Omer lo bo bayom. Rabbi Eliezer says if you went out, became tahor, and then that very day where you became tahor, going to the cemetery, then you don't bring the carbon tuma because you have a chiddush. Rabbi Eliezer says this is his fourth leniency in the last 5 lines. He says yamim arishonim yipulu achiyu ol yamim rishonim. Meaning to say, it says in the about if you become tamei from a dead body, it says the yamim arishonim yipulu, which means until you will have the earlier days. Okay. Means they need at least more than 1 day. So says the Gemara, let's say somebody took a vow of Naziris while he was in the cemetery. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Naziris Chalav. Rabbi Yochanan says, yeah, we know that he, according to our Mishnah, it doesn't count towards his days, and he doesn't bring Karan Tumah, but Rabbi Yochanan says he's still a Nazir. And we'll see why. Rish Lakish Amar Ein Naziris Chalav. Rish Lakish says he's not a Nazir. Rabbi Yochanan says Naziris Chalav Savar Mitla Talia B'Kaima. So he says the Naziris is suspended. The Naziris is suspended, and it's Talia B'Kaima. And Kivin the Mishkacha Tahara Chayla. Once it finds the state of something to become purity, immediately the Naziris is active again. Whereas Rish Lakish says Ein Naziris Chalav. He says there's no Naziris there at all. Ihadar v'amar chayla v'ilolo. He says if he'll go back and repeat it, then the Naziris will be active again, but otherwise it won't. So again, Rabbi Lakish says the Naziris doesn't take effect because he's in the cemetery. Rabbi Yochanan says it takes effect; it's just suspended until you have a state of ritual purity. So the Gemara says Rabbi Yochanan challenges Rish Lakish. Says for Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish, Misha Nazir. He doesn't bring count towards 30 days and he doesn't bring a carbon tuma. So Rabbi Yochanan says, Rish Lakish, he says he doesn't bring a carbon tuma. Carbon tuma, okay, he doesn't bring a carbon tuma, but the Naziris is still active on him. Wouldn't we say that? It's just the fact that he doesn't bring the carbon tuma, but he can't go and drink wine in the cemetery, then he's a Nazir. Kumar says, what would Rish Lakish say? Eino b'toras. You mean Eino b'toras tuma, Eino b'toras carbon. Meaning to say no, he's not under the rubric at all of tuma. He's not under the rubric at all of having to bring a carbon. He's not at all under that rubric. He's not in the parasha. And so therefore, he doesn't bring carbon tuma, and he's not at all in the parsha. So again, Rabbi Yochanan challenges Rish Lakish. Esvei misha yotame v'nazar asur galeach v'lishtos yayin v'letame meisim. Somebody who was tamei when he became a Nazir, he's not allowed to get a haircut, to drink wine, to contact, or to devim gilch v'shos yayin v'nitmal meisim hareza sofek esarbayim. And if he did all these things, if he drank wine, if he had accepted the Naziris in a state of tumah, and then he drank wine, if, for example, he's going to get the lashes. Now, if you want to say like Rabbi Yochanan, the Nazir says chal on him, and it's applicable, even though he was tummy when he accepted it. That's why he gets the 40 lashes. But if you want to say that the Naziris wasn't applicable at him at all, why indeed does he get the 40 lashes? if the Naziris wasn't applicable. So it's a question on Rish Lakish. So the Gemara says, no, what Rish Lakish say? Hachamaya Skinan. We're on top of 17a. What are we talking about here? Biyod Sevin Yafnas. So Rish Lakish says, no, we have to answer the question. Now, what we're talking about here is where he went out of the cemetery, and then he went out of the cemetery. Bryce is talking about a case that he went out of the cemetery, accepted it, became pure, accepted upon himself, and then back in, and that's why he's going to get the lashes. So we look at the Tosas here. Tosas says, "B'yotzim in atoma v'hiza v'shana v'taval v'tibo of naziris pamacher." So he left the cemetery, got out of a state of ritual impurity, became pure, sprinkled the water upon himself, and then goes back in his tovel, accepts upon himself the naziris. And then a second time he goes back into the cemetery and becomes tamei. But what's the chiddush there? He's a flat out nazir who's tummy once in his life. So Tosfos answers, So the first answer of Tosfos is, even though he doesn't say explicitly, I'm a nazir again. All he says is Yachul Olai Naziris. He just used a different formulation that should take effect. And so therefore, that's the first answer. That he doesn't need to use the exact same formulation to reaccept it. Or alternatively, Bryce is teaching us that right when he immerses in the mikvah, after he had become tamei from the first one, right when he immerses in the mikvah, he's obligated to accept the naziris, and if he doesn't, he's in violation of Bal Yachel. Those are the two answers of Tosfos. The Mefarish gives a different answer. He says it's to tell us that this price is not like Rabbi Eliezer, who says that same day he won't have to bring the carbon tumah, that he needs at least 2 days. Okay, fine. So those are the possible chidushim here. Gemara will do one more attempt from the Gemara. Gemara attempts another question on Reish Lakish. So the Gemara says, Eisvei, Ein Tamei Shenazar or Nazir Tahor Shenitma. There's no difference between somebody who's Tamei who became a Nazir or somebody Tahor became a Nazir became Tamei. Somebody who was in a cemetery, so to speak, when he became tamei, his seventh day counts as the first day of Nazirus. For Nazir Tar Shenitma Ein Shvi Shalo where if he was Tar and became tamei, his seventh day does not count as part of the count. So, and because the reason is the person who was tamei after he was initially tahor, he needs to bring the karbanos on day 8, whereas the person who was tamei from the beginning doesn't need to bring the karbanos. And if Gemara says, and if you're going to be like Reish Lakish, who says that the Naziris doesn't take effect until he re-accepts the Naziris, am I olam and a minion? Why does it count for the Naziris? He hasn't accepted the Naziris upon himself. And so therefore, this is indeed a question on Reish Lakish. Okay, so we'll stop here. I think we're going to bring another way to explain the dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, and we'll pick that up, God willing, tomorrow's daf. All right, we'll stop here. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address them.